Yay Networks.
You are listening to Junkyard Mayhem, episode 10.
10 episodes.
We made it to 10.
Oh, boy.
I think we can give up now.
Oh, shit.
I feel like that we've proven ourselves. We are capable of doing
We're a 10-episode podcast.
a 10-episode podcast. That may be our limit.
Wow.
No, don't worry, everyone.
It's not.
The Junkyard Mayhem has only just begun.
Okay.
That's a substantial number of podcasts. Mm-hmm. What's been your favorite memory?
Oh, okay. Spring that question on me. Well, I am extremely excited for today's episode.
Today's
It is my
your favorite memory?
No, I'm going somewhere with this. Today is my second dumpster dive.
We have a dumpster dive.
I think my favorite memory was perhaps my first dumpster dive. This one is way better because my first one was about the Canada goose as a species.
I will say the comments on that podcast were exceptionally excited
Thank you.
about your deep dive, your
Thank
dumpster
you, everyone.
dive.
Yes. Well, today I think is better. I mean, who knows? If you guys really liked the goose one, maybe it's worse.
They were like, no, give out to the gooses, actually.
Yeah, do a different species of goose. No, this is different, but I'm really excited about it. What has been your favorite memory?
I also really enjoyed the dumpster dive.
I was going to say, don't say the one that you did with Andrew, the one episode that I was not a part of.
Sure, you've only been in 9.
Okay.
Look at you.
It doesn't matter.
So really, I'm the superior, or at least the more experienced podcaster. My favorite memory has been getting to sit and look into your beautiful eyes for an hour each week. That's been my favorite part.
That's been your favorite part.
Yes.
You look into my eyes all day long.
All this humor and camaraderie.
Wow. It has been really fun. Each episode has been really
and
fun.
reading all of the just wonderful comments and feedback that we've been getting. Leave a review, please. Thank you. Okay. It's been great, and we're excited to get to 100. I think that's the next milestone.
Oh, it goes from 10 to 100?
I don't know. Well, 10's not really a real milestone.
Yes, it is. We can celebrate it.
I think most podcasts have 10 episodes.
That's true. All right. Do you want to give them a little? I know you have an update you want to give. Don't worry, everyone. It's not about his hand ointment. Thank God.
Hand ointment's not going well. We'll just gloss over that.
Now we've fallen off the wagon already. Okay. What is your big update?
Well, if you are watching this on video, you will see that I am not in my normal wheelchair.
Wow.
So if you've been following our story for a bit, you'll know that about a year ago, I finally got a new wheelchair. Mm-hmm. You can get a new one every 5 years through insurance.
But you had been using your old one for 7.
I've been using my old one for 7, basically because switching into a new wheelchair is like switching into a new pair of shoes that not only don't fit you, but they actively spike your toes and burn your heels and cause you to not be able to walk.
Yeah, because I was going to say the new shoe analogy doesn't do it, Shane. Like, if you can't function in a new wheelchair, it's more than a new pair of shoes. So
I received that new wheelchair after a year of kind of like fighting insurance and getting it fitted to me, and it didn't really fit.
Yeah.
I was very uncomfortable, which is an understatement.
Your legs would go numb.
My legs would go numb, my butt would go numb, my ribs would just burn in pain.
Couldn't eat.
And I couldn't do any of my normal function because of the way it's just slightly different than my old arrangement. So, needless to say, I haven't been using my new wheelchair for over a year. Every once in a while, I'd get in it for like a minute.
Yeah.
Remember everything I hate about it, and give up again for another 4 months.
Yep. Until now. As
the holidays were approaching, I needed a way to decrease my overall happiness and joy. I was feeling too festive, too wonderful, too in love with my life. I said, what can I do to put a damper on my holidays? I know. I am going to force myself to begin using my new wheelchair in earnest. Mm-hmm. I'm going to fight through the pain. I'm going to ignore the drastic loss of function. And I'm going to suffer my way right through the holidays and brute force it until the chair is better.
That part is true. The first part isn't. It wasn't so much that Shane had too much holiday spirit. It's that he wants to bring this new chair to LA. We are going for 3 months. He really wants to use this one. There's been a couple moments with his old chair where we're like, oh, is it breaking?
The old chair is as Junkyard Mayhem as you can get. It's being held together with duct tape and super glue.
There's some live wires that are hanging out.
There are active live wires.
If you touch them together, different parts of the chair move.
We don't know what they do. We really don't. I don't know how I've ever gotten through an airport without setting off every alarm that's there. But it's on its last limb.
Yep.
And I don't want that to break down, and die while we're in LA. I will say, as much as it annoys me to do so, that my new chair, the one I'm in now, does have a lot of really great features that I'm genuinely excited about.
Yep.
It can elevate almost to Hannah's eye level.
Yeah,
which
it's getting there.
Is great. When we're walking around somewhere, we can be eye to eye.
We can talk a lot easier too when we're walking.
Her.
Yeah.
When we walk around like the mall, let's say, and I'm in my old chair, I'm constantly like, what? And she's like 8 feet tall. And I sit down at like her butt level.
Yeah.
This chair
it's a lot faster.
It's a lot faster.
Yep.
It has lights,
Yep.
which I love.
An amazing headrest.
An amazing headrest.
Yep.
So there are things I'm excited about. And I've been in it for 4 days now.
Yeah.
Nonstop. And about 100 times, Hannah's been like, do you want to just go back on the old one for like an hour?
Whenever you're like, my rib hurts.
Everything hurts. I've been very grumpy.
Yeah.
But I'm getting through it, and it is improving.
That's
We're
good.
making a lot of adjustments every day.
You might see, if you're watching, you might see a heating pad shoved behind Shane's elbow.
Yeah.
It's because it's heavy and malleable.
I have a makeshift armrest, which is a heating pad.
It's not warm right now, but
I've got a towel shoved under my butt. It's kind of
it's a pillowcase, actually.
a pillowcase folded up
a
under
fleece
my butt.
pillowcase, yeah.
Oh, it's fleece? Mm-hmm. I couldn't tell. I have to sit in it without my pants on.
Okay.
Feel what that's like. Anyway, I'm in my new chair. I don't think I'm going back to my old one. And you all on their YouTube channel have been very, very invested in that transition.
Yeah.
So shut up
Oh, Shane.
from now on.
No, we just wanted to update you. This is it's the biggest thing that's been happening in the past couple weeks for
And
us.
I only said shut up because there were people that were beginning to get very aggressive.
Yeah.
If you were casually curious about me and my new chair,
That's fine.
I love you.
Yeah.
If you were aggressive
Well, there were
and
people.
demeaning to me about it and making me feel bad that I wasn't in it yet, then shut up.
There were people saying like you got the chair just to get views, but you never intended to use it. There were like conspiracy
It
theories.
has nothing to do with the fact that I can't walk.
Yeah. You're a wheelchair grubber.
So that is the new wheelchair. Now it's time for the dumpster dive.
Oh,
I have
Shane.
no idea what it's about. So
I'm so excited.
that's my favorite aspect of the dumpster dive. But when we come back, Hannah is going to present me with the topic
Yep.
that she's been researching
Yes.
avidly
Yep.
for many days now.
Yep. Here we go. All right, we are back. We are ready for the dumpster dive. If you have not listened to my previous,
If you haven't listened, people are like, what the hell is a dumpster dive?
I know it was a deep dive. Like I'm gonna go in depth on a topic and tell Shane about it.
Teach me about it.
Teach Shane about it. But because this is Junkyard Mayhem, we call it a dumpster dive, and because the topics are a little not typical.
Yeah, she's not teaching me about, math.
Yeah, I'm not teaching you about math. This is about a pseudoscience topic, actually.
Okay, here we go.
Now, let me just say, Shane is not someone who believes in urban legends or anything.
Or edited, period.
Anything that
Shane
he
believes in nothing.
cannot see and is not certain about. I am the opposite. I'm happy to entertain pretty much anything. So, Shane, I'm going to ask you.
I'm a very evidence-based person.
So I'm excited to hear. I think I know. What are your thoughts on Bigfoot?
Is this about Bigfoot?
Tangentially, yeah.
What are my thoughts on Bigfoot?
What do you think about Bigfoot?
I do not believe that Bigfoot is real.
Surprise,
I
surprise.
think that every sighting and occurrence of Bigfoot has either been A, made up by people who just enjoy doing that, or B, confused,
Yeah.
You see a real bear on its hind legs and, you've had one too many moonshine.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly that's Bigfoot.
Yeah,
So
you're right.
I do not
Maybe.
believe in Bigfoot.
Or perhaps there are big feet. Bigfoots?
There's big feet out there,
Bigfoots.
and they belong to my wife.
So we're not talking specifically about
That
Bigfoot.
joke was so funny. And I
My
got
wife. I was moving on. I'm so sorry. That was funny. Good job. Anyway, we're not talking about Bigfoot. We are talking about one specific creature. Have you heard, Shane, of the Minnesota Iceman?
no. But I imagine
What do you think is the Minnesota Iceman?
that it is a mystical creature from Minnesota. Maybe that lives, we have many lakes that freeze in the winter.
Yes?
Maybe it lives on a lake in Minnesota
Uh-huh.
and causes mayhem
Oh,
to the local children
okay.
in the area.
You
Like
were-
it goes to schools
Oh,
and it takes one
that's an odd choice. You are
every Christmas.
pretty much 100% off.
Okay. That's why we're doing a dumpster dive.
That's why I'm going to teach you about it.
What is the Minnesota Iceman?
It's not even really from Minnesota, but we're going to get into that.
Well, the name would imply otherwise.
I know. The man who owns it is from Minnesota,
Okay.
but he did not find the Iceman here.
He owns it. All right.
We're going to get into it.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to read some of this. I have a couple different sources for all this info that we'll put into the description. There's like a podcast about this that's really interesting. There are some books that are, there's a lot of stuff about this.
Do you want to give a little caveat about your difficulty with absolute truth?
Yeah, I do have. This is not a good job for me because something like the Minnesota Iceman has a lot of different ways the story has been told. And I cannot deal with not knowing which one is correct. So, like in here, I have, the two different ways this is told at one point that are completely contradictory. And I don't know what to do about that. Like I told Shane, I was like, there are two things here
Yeah,
that
without telling me what it was about.
like, there are two different things and like different sources say different things. And what do I do? And he was like, just say both of it. And I was like,
Yeah. As long as you acknowledge that there are conflicting
yeah,
reports, it's fine. That's
I like
part
to
of
know
the story.
the truth.
I know you do. And I'm proud of you for getting through it.
Okay, so we're going to get through this. All right, the Minnesota Iceman first appeared at fairs and carnivals in the 1960s. So we're going way back.
Fairs and carnivals.
Yeah, it was in the carnival circuit.
Okay.
Okay.
Carnivals back then were something.
Yes.
They were some Junkyard Mayhem.
Yeah, they were like exhibitions of different things.
Exploitative
And people.
exhibitions.
Yes. Now, he wasn't alive. It was a 6-foot-tall, hairy, Bigfoot-like creature that was lying on its back. It was like a laying down exhibit inside a block of ice, inside a freezer. And you could only see him through the top of the freezer. It was glass. So you could look down in, but it was in ice. So it's like kind of hard to see through. Okay.
And this was a display
Yeah.
at carnivals and
Yes.
fairs.
And so he was under
Step
the,
right up, pay your 2 tickets.
Yes.
See the Minnesota Iceman.
it was between 25 and 35 cents.
Don't look close because it's a stuffed animal.
Shane. Anyway, so the person who was exhibiting it was an ex-Air Force pilot,
Oh,
Frank Hansen.
okay.
And he claimed to be the temporary ward of this body, but it had an owner, a secret owner that he would not identify. He said at times like it's a eccentric actor from California. So there were like rumors of who it might be. No one knows.
Mysterious.
I think it was Frank's, and he was like, "This isn't mine. I'm just keeping it for someone."
I found this bear. I stuffed it. Kind of looks like a human, doesn't it?
And over the years, he told different versions of how he got this. He said like he found it. A lot of the stories were that he found it in like different countries in Asia, either like floating.
The owner found it, or this Air Force guy found it?
Frank found it, or people found it and he bought it from them.
It sounds like Frank is full of shit.
Yeah, Frank didn't know. Frank couldn't decide what the best version was. At one point, he said he like shot it in Minnesota, but every other story he says it's in Asia, and it was like somehow brought over here.
And honestly, if you're moving from town to town, in
It doesn't matter.
carnivals,
He's like,
you can tell people whatever you
yeah.
want.
And he was in the Air Force, supposedly. That's what I've seen. And he was in these areas. So he was like, I was here. I either bought this from these people. I shot it. Who knows? And it had like a bullet wound. Like one of its eyes was out.
Oh, jeez. It sounds like it met a untimely demise.
Yes, it was
Like maybe
shot.
Frank did shoot it.
Yeah, it was shot by someone. There was
Okay.
a bullet wound.
Eh,
Okay.
Poor Iceman.
Poor Iceman, I know. So in November 1968, a zoology student from the University of Minnesota, Terry Cullen,
Terry?
saw Terry. You're
The-
pretending you know.
The Terry Cullen
Shane,
from the U?
you're gonna confuse people.
I
So
don't know who Terry McCullen is.
Terry
Or whatever.
Cullen.
Terry Cullen.
Terry Cullen. He saw this creature on display at the International Livestock Exhibition in Chicago. He wanted to see it.
The internet.
He wanted to see it, so he paid 25 cents
Yeah.
or 35 cents, it's disputed,
As one does.
to Hansen, and he examined the body through the glass and ice. So he's looking through with his zoology eyeballs.
Examined is a strong word. That's what everyone else is doing at that.
Well, he comes to the conclusion that this is real. He's like, this is a real body. It is not fake.
From outside of the freezer.
Yes,
He
it's
did
never. Spoiler alert! It never comes out of the freezer. Everything we're going to talk about, it is in the freezer.
Okay. Free the Iceman.
At
Free-
one point, the ice cracks.
Just
Okay,
don't get ahead of yourself.
but it's never out of the freezer. So all of this, people looking at it, it's all through the freezer.
Yeah.
He says this is real, and he contacts
Terry does.
Terry contacts Ivan Sanderson, who is one of the leading authors on Bigfoot and the Abominable Snowman. Terry has read a lot of his books. He's like, who would love this? Ivan Sanderson would love
A
this.
scientist.
And he is right. Ivan Sanderson receives his mail.
Ivan Sanderson loses it.
Cannot believe his eyes. He receives the mail at his home in New Jersey, which was nicknamed The Farm. He called his house The Farm.
That's creepy.
I know. At the time, he was hosting a group of similar, like-minded folks interested in cryptozoology.
What's that?
Cryptozoology is the study of unknown, legendary, or extinct animals whose existence is debated or unsubstantiated.
Like
So,
dinosaurs.
Loch Ness, Shane. No.
Never saw them. Don't believe they were real. I'd like to point out that this is such a good story, and I'm getting so into it that I've put my head back.
Wow, you
In
might
my
recline.
headrest.
Yeah. If you start tipping back, I'm gonna snap you back. You need
It
to
feels
be
like I'm being told a wonderful bedtime story
No.
that I get to poke holes in.
Yeah, you need to be on your toes. So like the Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, or Bigfoot.
Or Bigfoot, or
So
the
he's like-
Abominable Snowman.
So all these people are here.
Or the Minnesota Iceman.
One of the people at the home, at Sanderson's home, when he gets the news from Cullen, was the Belgian-French zoologist Bernard Heuvelman. He is otherwise known as the father of cryptozoology. Wow. So Sanderson and Heuvelman are freaking out.
This is an elite group
Yeah.
hanging out at the farm.
They're the tip top
The
of
top
the
minds of cryptozoology
community.
are coming together around the Minnesota Iceman.
Yep, they immediately leave. They get
party.
the news. They leave, and on December 17th, they arrive at Frank Hansen's home.
I like to imagine that they're all like eating dinner, and Sanderson opens up his mail, gasps, hands it to the other guy, Bernard or whatever.
Heuvelman, Bernard. Yep.
They both lose it, jump up from the table, and sprint out the door.
Yep.
There's an Iceman.
Yeah. So Sanderson and Heuvelman arrive at Frank Hansen's home to inspect the body on December 17th. So like 2 weeks later, they're there.
So he's not on tour.
No, he's home because it's December now. I think the Chicago thing was like the last exhibit of the year. He now has it home for the off season.
You would think that December would be prime season
For the ice.
for the Iceman.
I know. So they inspect the body through the ice, through the glass.
Come on, people.
I know.
No one's like, open it up. Let me take a real look.
Well, at this time, at least I read in one report that during this inspection, the ice cracks or
They're
something.
inspecting it a little
The
too
glass
hard.
cracks.
A bunch of men are
Yeah.
just breathing heavily
And
on
they,
it.
they say that a smell comes out like rotting flesh, a really bad smell.
Oh, yeah.
So they're like, well, that makes it seem legit.
That checks out.
Yeah, I don't know how true that is. That's just something I read. This is all of this, but I'll stop giving that caveat.
That's the caveat.
I'm freaking out, Shane. I'm like, I can't verify that there was a bad smell.
You know what you said happened? You're going to get a letter, a nasty, sternly worded letter from Bernard, the leading cryptozoologist.
I hope not.
He's going to say those events did not transpire
Oh, God.
in the way you reported, young woman.
Well, I would love to know from him. I don't think he's alive anymore, but I would love to know from anyone what really transpired.
Spoiler, they were all murdered by the Iceman.
So, Shane, what do you think their conclusions were? These two leading cryptozoologists are here. They're looking in the case, and what do you think they say?
I think that they want it to be real, so they will say it's real.
You said that in the rudest way possible. So they were both completely convinced that the creature was real.
Didn't see that coming.
They were like, yep. Heuvelman publishes in a Belgian journal that the Iceman is a new species that he names Homo pongoides.
How are you just like
Pongoids?
declaring
I don't know.
new species based on something that you didn't even like examine?
I know.
You looked at it through ice and through a freezer.
I know. That's a reach.
And you smelled some raw. Isn't like frozen things? Wouldn't they not smell?
I don't know. Depends. I couldn't tell you. Would a frozen body smell? I don't know.
You didn't do any kind of testing
No,
of your own.
I didn't do
And this-
testing of my own. I couldn't find a corpse
We're gonna let
to
some.
smell.
We're gonna let some meat rot, and then we're gonna freeze it.
I'm sure you could find that information online. I don't know. They were like, oh, that seems real. His idea was that this species that he has now named had evolved backward from Neanderthals. I've heard it. I think it's Neanderthal, but I can't bring myself to say it that way.
Doesn't matter.
And become more ape-like. So it's a more ape-like version.
So it regressed.
Yeah, it regressed, according to him.
Okay.
Sanderson also thought it was real, but he had a slightly different theory. He published in an Italian journal. I guess he's going overseas. No one in America would post it.
How is there an industry
I know.
for these types of publications?
The Belgian journal actually said like a respected Belgian journal.
Wow.
Yeah. The Italian one did not say respected, so I don't know if it was or wasn't.
That was the knockoff version.
Yeah, but he says that the Iceman was probably a relative of Gigantopithecus.
Okay. That's another real species.
That, Shane, do you know what that is?
Triceratops. No
No,
idea.
Shane. Gigantopithecus, which I'm probably saying incorrectly, is an extinct species of ape. This is real. Like there are fossils, it's real, from roughly 2 million to 350,000 years ago.
Okay.
They lived in southern China, so I think that's why, they were like, it's probably from here. And were roughly 10 feet tall and weighed between 400 and 600 pounds. And I know you love the book, The Jungle Book, the movie. Remember when we watched The Jungle Book and you talked about it for years?
The strength of the wolf
Yeah.
is the pack.
Okay.
And the strength of the pack is the wolf.
So you know King Louie in The Jungle Book? He's the giant orangutan-looking thing in the cave, huge. He is actually not an orangutan. He's based off of the Gigantopithecus. That's it. They're huge.
That's wild.
Yeah,
You could have just told me about those.
I know. All right, so anyway, Heuvelman and Sanderson had two different theories for what it was, but they agreed that it was real. Now that Sanderson had seen that it was real, he decided it was real, he began to freak out that Frank Hansen had this in his, presumably basement, in his house.
In his Minnesota basement.
Yeah.
He's like, sir, that needs to not be at carnivals.
Yeah, he was
with
like,
children coughing on it.
this is of great zoological importance.
Wait, crypto.
Not even crypto. He was like, this is real. So come on. A new species. He had, this was a new species. It cannot be in Frank Hansen's house in a freezer. He wants it out of the carnival circuit and into the hands of the authorities. He's like, this needs to be in the hands of the scientific
And by
community.
authorities, I mean myself.
Yeah, he went all out. Not even himself. He alerted the Bureau of Customs, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of the Interior, and the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare.
And they all went, oh, Jesus, it's Sanderson again. He's found another species, guys.
He wasn't sure that would work, so he also contacted people that he knew at the Smithsonian Institute, and they in turn contacted the FBI. They were like, this is actually worrisome. They said that Hansen was transporting a corpse across state lines. A scientific journal had identified it as a human, or at least a subspecies, a homo something, and now he's transporting a corpse.
Wow.
They tell the FBI that. The Smithsonian.
The Smithsonian identified it as a...
No, they're saying a journal. So basically, when Sanderson and Hoovelman published about this,
right.
they were like, look, this is in a journal. They inspected it. It's a human identified by these people.
Even if it's not like a new human.
Not a new human, but it's a corpse of some sort.
Okay.
He's transporting it around.
And you
This
can't
should
do
be
that.
seized.
You're not allowed to...
You can't cross
corpses around?
state lines with a corpse.
Not like fresh ones, but...
Nope, not even a
if you
frozen
find
one,
a real
Shane.
old one...
So Sanderson obviously didn't know which jurisdiction Iceman would fall under.
At some point... Hold on.
Oh, okay.
With enough time,
Uh-huh.
do you think that a corpse becomes an object and not what was a person?
No.
I do.
Legally, no.
Emotionally, yeah.
Sure, Shane.
If like a million years have gone by,
Nope, not for me. You have no emotions. Nothing changes over time for me. You just couldn't
it's
care
not
less.
an object. Okay.
All right. So anyway, he didn't know which jurisdiction Iceman would fall under, obviously. He contacted everyone he could think of.
Yeah, lots of gray area here.
Unfortunately for him, no one cared. Nothing came of any of his reports. Every bureau was like, are you kidding? An Iceman in Minnesota?
Sanderson runs out to his mailbox every day to see if there's a letter radio from the FBI.
Yep.
Nothing.
They read a man in Minnesota has Iceman in freezer, and they're like, we are busy.
Okay, yeah. Lots of people in Minnesota have weird stuff.
Yep. So one thing kind of comes of this. Dr. John Napier was the director of primate biology at the Smithsonian Institute. So he's the real deal.
Sounds like
this
legit.
isn't cryptozoology. He's studying primates.
This is no Bernard.
He's part of the Smithsonian. He has heard about this. He contacts Frank Hansen and says, can I come see the Iceman? I want to see this for myself. I trust me. I don't know if I trust Sanderson and Hoovelman, these cryptozoologists. So he wants to come inspect. This is where the story splits. There are now two accounts of what happened next.
Kind of like a crack in the ice.
A crack. This is where the ice cracks. And they contradict each other. So I'm going to tell you one first and then the other one. The first account is that Dr. Napier, received a reply from a supposed distant family member of Hansen's. Someone is like, I'm not Hansen, but I'll reply. It's probably Hansen. Saying that Hansen is unavailable. He has gone to Florida or California or somewhere.
I hope he didn't bring the Iceman to Florida.
No, he didn't. He has returned the Iceman to the original owner. That person has now reclaimed his Iceman. Frank doesn't have it anymore. All Hansen has is a rubber replica.
Oh.
He's going to continue touring at some point. He has a rubber replica. The original is with its owner. You're not going to find it. Okay?
It's lost forever.
So now Sanderson, the one who originally, checked out the Iceman and alerted the authorities, compares photos of the replica to photos of the original that he had taken, and concluded that they were the same. It's the exact same freezer unit. The ice crystal patterns on the glass are identical. Like, there's no way that he could have replicated it this closely. Okay. Hoovelman also looks at the photos. He was the only other person that saw the original with Sanderson. And he writes, I was the only one to have many excellent photos of the original exhibit. I had been sent a few color slides of Hansen's new exhibit. After a comparison with my own, I had to agree with the evidence. It was the same and only specimen. So he's like, this isn't different. This is the one I saw.
So they both agree that the new rubber replica
is the same one they saw.
Is the same one.
Nothing has changed. Frank is just saying it's rubber.
That it was always rubber.
Kind of confirming that it's always rubber.
And they just got too hysterical about what they'd hoped.
Yeah, so they're like, oh, I guess it's rubber. This is the same one. Whatever. But there's another account, Shane. This one I think is the one that happened because it just seems more likely. It would be weird to make up that Dr. Napier went there. So this one is that when he reached out, Dr. Napier actually received a response from Hansen inviting him to come.
Okay.
So, and this one was in the Scientific American. So if this is false, that's where I got this information. Anyway, so he's invited to come see the Iceman, but when he's inspecting it, he says, this is not real. This is a latex model. Like, this isn't a real body. And at that point, Hansen says, yes, this is a latex model. I don't have the original anymore.
He tried to pass it off, though. He was like, here, go ahead and spend it.
That sounds more likely than the other one.
He got hauled out. He was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The original, oh, that's right. I gave it back to the owner.
I'm sure it's a combination of the two because there's quotes of the family member that responded. There's Dr. Napier did see it at some point. He says he did. So I'm sure it's a combination, but at some point he sees it and it is a latex model. But Sanderson now receives photos of this latex model. Dr. Napier had seen a latex model. He has photos, whatever. And Sanderson, in this version, concludes that it's different than the one that he and Hoovelman had.
Oh.
He says, this is not the same one. There are photos over the years. The Iceman's mouth is open in this one. I never saw his teeth. Like, it's a completely different... No, it's very similar, but it's not the same one.
So in these two different stories,
Yeah.
one, it sounds pretty conclusive.
Yes.
That it was a fake all along.
And in the other, there's two.
There's in number two,
At least two.
there's a possibility that there really is
Yeah.
a real Iceman somewhere, and we don't know where it is
Yes.
or what it is.
I'm freaking out, Shane. I don't know. I'm not done yet, though. Dr. Napier is not freaking
So
out.
that was the end of the
Nope.
story.
He's sure this is not real. Dr. Napier is like, this is rubber? Okay, I don't believe anything you've ever said. And Hanson's story has changed. Where did you get this? Why are you telling me that this is a different story than you said last year? Actually, this is only like 4 months apart. This doesn't last very long. 4 months after the Iceman first appeared, back in November, Dr. Napier reports that the Smithsonian has officially classified the Iceman as a hoax. He's like, I inspected it. It was rubber. I don't buy that there's another real one. The Smithsonian's official stance is that this is a hoax. They print in the June 1969 issue of the Smithsonian Torch that the Iceman was made from latex, rubber, and hair by a group of exhibit specialists on the West Coast at the price of $3,500.
I didn't even know the price.
Yeah, which was quite a lot in the 1960s. A lot of money to spend on a stuffed animal. And then the only really addendum to this story is that in 2013, the Iceman resurfaced after decades of being missing.
It's back?
Yeah, it's back.
Is it traveling the circuits?
It was just, no.
I mean, the circus.
That's not really a thing
circuits.
anymore, I don't think. So no,
I went to a circus like 5 years ago.
not this kind of circus, Shane, not exhibits where you pay 25 cents to look into a box. It was put up for sale online, like kind of out of the blue.
No.
Yes. And it was featured in an episode of the reality show Shipping Wars, where they picked it up from its home in Cottage Grove, Minnesota, where it has, I guess, been for 40 years.
It's been right in our backyard the whole time.
Although I didn't watch that episode. They might have said, I don't know if it bounced around at all. And they drove it down to its new home, which is the Museum of Weird in Austin, Texas.
Wow, that.
And wait, hold on. They didn't refrigerate it on the way down.
No.
This was in the podcast episode that I listened to for this. Yeah, they didn't refrigerate it. It defrosts on the way down and the owner's not concerned about it. So they're like, okay. But I think at this point, this one was the rubber replica. So I didn't think of that as a gotcha. I was like, well, yeah, this is the rubber one.
Yeah.
But no one knows if there was a real.
Still unknown if the real original
Yep.
Minnesota Iceman is tucked away in some eccentric person's
Yep.
frozen basement.
Who knows? Some California actor, maybe?
You want to hear my official verdict?
I would love to.
Hoax.
I know that
100% hoax.
But, the podcast that I got a lot of this information from talked about how, it being a hoax was for him almost more meaningful. It was so well done, sure, it could be real, whatever, but it was a really well done, American carnival,
Yeah.
historical,
That's fascinating to
just
me.
our culture.
That the circus
Yeah.
industry was so thriving at one point.
Yeah.
That this was valid for them to do.
Yep.
To make a fake Minnesota Iceman.
Yeah.
And grift people.
Yeah. He
But
probably
they-
made his money back in quarters. He spent $3,500 to have it made and then got it all back.
Here's my idea.
Okay.
Probably shouldn't be saying this publicly.
Oh, boy.
We are surrounded by ice right now. What if we claim that you were out walking on our frozen pond
Yeah.
and discovered something that will
Yeah.
make and freeze?
We'll put in ice.
It's just a big hunk of raw chicken.
Yeah, you can kind of see.
It has a face.
Yep.
I don't want to do it. And we'll invite people to come see it at our home and make them pay
25 cents.
while adjusted for inflation
$5.
$10. That was a great story. I was enthralled the whole time.
I'm glad. I really enjoyed it.
I love thinking about the fact that those grown-ups
Yeah.
spent hours and days and months of their lives
Yeah.
trying to track down the true meaning and history of the Minnesota Iceman.
They were excited about it.
They were. That's adorable.
Yep.
It's adorable. And, they had their passions.
Yep.
They don't align with mine, but to each their own.
They kind of align with mine. I'm all for it. Keep hunting.
Next week, it will be just me on the podcast explaining that Hannah is off in California.
I'm receiving a cryptozoology degree from the Institute of the Weird or whatever. Where would you get that degree?
Probably in Italy.
Hoax University.
Belgium.
Yeah.
Hoax University. Okay. Time for a break. Hannah needs a break. We'll be right back, and we have a fun little game to wrap up today's episode. We are back, and after all of that very serious and heavy topic matter with the Minnesota Iceman,
That was serious and heavy?
I think we need kind of a lighter outro
Okay.
for today's episode.
What do you have planned?
We are going to be playing a game that was popularized
Nope.
popularized on Reddit, where I spend most of my time, if you can't tell that by now. We're going to be playing Am I the Asshole?
Oh.
Where anonymous individuals, write in with something that happened
Yeah.
where they are being blamed as an asshole.
Okay.
And they would like to know from the public, are they truly an asshole for what they may or may not have done?
So we get to judge them.
Or, yes, we get to judge.
Okay.
So I am going to read you. Actually, maybe I'll have you read.
Okay.
Just because I tend to read slowly.
Okay.
And then we'll decide if this individual is the asshole.
All right. My wife and I have 4 kids, 15, 13, 3, 2. The 15-year-old is mine from a previous relationship, and the 13-year-old is hers. We have a nanny for all of the kids. My 13-year-old went out with friends and asked our nanny to pick them up at 2. The younger 2 were asleep at 2, so she left them at home with the oldest and went to pick the 13-year-old and her friends up.
When I was reading it, pause. That was the spot where I was like, that seems maybe unsafe.
That the nanny left the
isn't that the nanny's
younger 2
main job?
with the 15-year-old? I know.
But that's not the topic.
That's not the point.
Yeah.
I mean, a 15-year-old is old enough to
I guess
babysit
15
their
is pretty
siblings.
old. Yeah, you're right.
At 2:30, the nanny called me and said that 13 and her friends weren't in the car yet and keep saying almost done when she asks where they were. The younger 2 are up by 3 and she didn't want to leave the oldest alone with them. I told her to call 13 and say she had 5 minutes to get to the car or they were walking home, 2 miles. I got a call from 13 maybe 20 minutes later asking me to call them an Uber because the nanny left them. She didn't mention a warning, so I called the nanny and confirmed that she called 13. She sent me a screenshot saying that 13 missed 5 calls from her and read a text warning them that she'd leave them if they weren't in the car in 5 minutes. I called 13 back and told her they were going to have to walk. 13 got home close to an hour later and was furious with both me and our nanny for making them walk and embarrassing her in front of her friends. My wife thinks 13 should have been punished, but I shouldn't have made her walk. Am I the asshole?
All right. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts?
As we are, going through the IVF process and having to think more and more about what we will be like as parents.
Yeah.
I thought this would be a fun one to see if we differ in our parental viewpoint of this specific story.
I mean, right now, I think, no, you are not the asshole.
Interesting.
A 13-year-old rudely making a nanny wait, having no regard for someone else's time, let alone her siblings, but the respect that you would have for your nanny, ignoring calls and then wanting an Uber because they didn't, no, you can walk 2 miles. I mean, the safety issue I would have to think about. I assume the area is safe, the kid made it home, whatever.
Yeah, I think we should just, blanket say.
Assume it's a safe
walk. If it was safe or unsafe weather or anything that would put the child at harm, then obviously, not a good idea. But I'm surprised that you came down on that side of it. I thought you would have thought that father is definitely an asshole and that he should have left work and gone to pick them up, or
Oh.
made the nanny go back, or something like that.
Oh my
Because
God.
I know how inconvenienced you would feel if suddenly a ride didn't show and we had to walk 2 miles
Well,
home.
the ride did show. If I didn't show to the ride
You're right.
and
Yep.
she waited at 2:30, she waited like over 30 minutes.
That is very true. I am on the same side as you.
Wow.
I would 100% be like, you asked the nanny to come get you and then made her wait for 30 minutes or however long it was.
No.
Unacceptable.
Unacceptable.
Do what you say. No. What's
Do
the
what you say you
Do what you say you'll
you
do.
will. Yeah, that's fine.
It's not a
I don't think
saying,
that's a saying. That's just a sentence.
And that is Jane's Junkyard Mayhem slogan of the week. Yeah, no, I think that a 13-year-old also, like, that's more than old enough to enjoy walking home.
I know.
You
With a
know?
group of friends, it seems like if the nanny was supposed to pick up her and her friends.
Yeah. And there were so many times around that age for me where I would call my parents and say the opposite. I'd be like, hey, we're done with our movie. Can we walk home?
Yeah.
We really want to walk home.
I know. It is fun.
And then being like, no,
Yeah.
we're coming to pick you up. That's a long walk. Or
Yeah.
whatever it is. So, I don't know. They
I know.
probably had fun with it.
I also feel kind of bad for the nanny because now she has a 13-year-old that's furious at her. Like, you're waiting for 30 minutes. You're texting the dad being like, what should I do? He says to leave.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this kid's going to be really annoyed at me.
The most annoying day of all was for the nanny.
Yes.
Like,
And having to worry, like, these kids are going to wake up that I'm in charge of and I left them with another kid. And, like, that's just so stressful. So,
without a doubt. If anyone's ever doing you a favor,
yeah.
like yesterday, it was being paid, but she was going out of her way
Yeah.
to go pick you up at the mall where
Yeah.
you were having fun.
Yeah.
You have no right to be rude to someone like that.
I know.
You should be praising them.
I know. Not nice.
I don't like children.
You don't let that
I
13-year-old.
don't like that 13-year-old. And I'm saying that the poster is absolved,
Yes, absolutely.
not the asshole.
Yeah.
Well, that was Am I the Asshole?
Wow.
Next week, we'll use a example from our own life.
Oh, that would be more
Next time we have a
higher
fight,
stakes. Yeah, a fight.
next
Who's
time
the
we have a fight,
asshole?
you're going to be like, is Shane the asshole here? All right, everyone. That was Junkyard Mayhem, episode number 10.
Episode 10.
Thank you for coming back week after week.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening and watching. Please leave us a review. Leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Leave a comment. Like it. Share it.
And go out there. Go ahead, Shane. What are you going to say?
It's a frozen junkyard out. Did I do that last week?
I don't remember.
I thought I said it's a frozen something last
It's okay.
week.
Just keep going.
The Minnesota Iceman is buried.
What?
Somewhere.
Was that how you pronounce the word buried?
Buried? Buried? He's buried.
Buried?
He's buried.
Yeah. That's not what you said.
Buried. I think I said buried.
Yeah, you did. Anyway, keep going. Good
It is a
job.
junkyard out there.
You're doing your best.
The Minnesota Iceman is buried deep, deep within the heaps of rubble.
Go dig him up.
Dig him up, but just remember he's rubber.
Okay.
So probably not worth your time. Bye, everyone.